Nathan Ford had oil stains under his nails, $40-some in his checking account, and a certified letter from Riverside Bank sitting unopened on his workbench because he already knew what it would say, and he'd been avoiding it for 3 days, since that letter represented 11 years of grinding effort inside a cinderblock shop on the fading industrial edge of Ashport, a mid-sized town that had watched its factories empty out and left behind a handful of stubborn small businesses that either adapted or folded, and his garage, Ford Classic Restorations, had outlasted most of them, though outlasting wasn't the same as flourishing, and at 36 he was worn down in ways sleep couldn't fix. Outside, October did its usual Midwest routine: thin cold sunlight, drifting leaves, the faint tang of smoke from a paper mill up the road, while inside, a half-stripped 1969 Pontiac GTO sat on jack stands, its engine pulled and resting nearby, owned by a suburban dentist who'd promised payment by month's end, a promise Nathan chose to believe. "You gonna open that or let it rot?" called Ray Odom, sliding out from under a 1972 Ford pickup on a creeper, a stocky 41-year-old with prematurely gray temples who'd worked beside Nathan for 9 years without once asking for the raise he'd earned, and when Nathan admitted it was a 60-day notice, Ray just handed him a soda and they sat with it, both aware that Nathan's insistence on doing honest, uncut work had cost him jobs. That 3 other local shops picked up without hesitation. Above the workbench sat a photo of Nathan and his late wife, Elena, on their wedding day, placed there years earlier by their daughter Ellie, now 9, currently laboring over a school ecosystem project with more focus than her father managed most days. He needed this garage to survive for her sake alone, and then his phone rang, an unfamiliar Chicago number, a crisp voice identifying herself as Renee Coleman, assistant to Camille Ashford, explaining that Ashford Industries had a restoration project and that Nathan's name came from Tony Ricci, a past client who never referred anyone lightly. The Ashford name was old money with a philanthropic sheen, built by the late Weston Ashford into an international company before his death 2 years prior, now run by his 30-year-old daughter Camille. And Renee explained bluntly that Camille owned a 1961 Ferrari 250 GT California Spider that had belonged to her father, one of fewer than 50 ever made, and that 3 other restoration firms had already tried and failed to move past initial assessment. The timeline was 6 weeks, tight for a car like this, but Nathan agreed to at least look, staring at the bank letter that had just told him he had 60 days left. Rather than sending the car to a proper facility, Camille asked that the evaluation happen at Nathan's own shop. Arriving on a covered trailer one Tuesday morning, and the moment it rolled out, Nathan felt something shift. The car was a masterpiece of curved fenders and long hood, finished in a red that had aged into something deeper, its chrome carrying an authentic patina and its leather interior cracked with age. Camille arrived 20 minutes later, driving herself in a dark SUV, younger and less polished than her photos suggested, accompanied by Victor Graham, the company's slick, overconfident chief operations director, who handed Nathan a business card before any greeting. When Nathan said he wouldn't promise a timeline before inspecting the car, Camille told him that was exactly the right answer, over Victor's visible impatience about the auction deadline, and Nathan explained he needed 2 full days for a proper assessment before quoting anything. Over those 2 days, the exterior proved genuinely well preserved, but underneath, Nathan found trouble. A brake master cylinder with the wrong bore diameter disguised with correct-looking casting marks, aftermarket calipers reshaped to mimic factory parts, a steering box with an incorrect internal ratio that would behave unpredictably at speed, problems confirmed independently by Ray, and tucked in the glove box was a 9-year-old service invoice claiming a full brake overhaul, its part numbers tracing to nothing real or to entirely different, cheaper components. Someone had deliberately installed wrong parts and built a paper trail to hide it. Nathan called Camille back, who arrived without Victor this time, and he walked her through every finding, the parts, the measurements, the falsified invoice, explaining plainly what failure under hard braking could mean, and when she asked who was responsible, he told her the shop that signed the invoice had closed years ago after multiple fraud complaints, but that the documentation had somehow made it into her father's records regardless. She authorized full repairs on the spot, wired a deposit, and told him to begin immediately, and Nathan set to work, sourcing correct factory parts through a trusted California contact, Walter Grant, a semi-retired engineer who insisted On verifying every part number himself and even offered to sign an affidavit if anyone ever challenged authenticity. As the weeks passed, more problems surfaced: mismatched carburetor components, incorrect clutch fluid, other small substitutions, all meticulously documented, photographed, and logged, because Nathan sensed this evidence might matter beyond the repair itself. 18 days in, Victor showed up unannounced, handling the discarded counterfeit parts and suggesting some of Nathan's interpretations about necessity might be revised, a thinly veiled warning that something had turned confrontational. And that evening Nathan told Ellie plainly that he'd found deliberately created problems that some people wished he hadn't, and she asked simply if he'd keep fixing it anyway, which he confirmed. 3 days later, his bank called, a loan officer named Paul Simmons, uneasy, admitting a third party had inquired about compliance issues at Nathan's business, though nothing had been found, and Nathan understood the timing wasn't coincidental. He pressed forward regardless, sourcing a replacement steering box from a French collector after Walter caught a discrepancy in the first unit, and kept building his own paper trail in parallel, filing a duplicate copy of everything with an attorney, Alan Whitfield, requesting the car's full service history. Nathan discovered 6 invoices over an 18-month window 9 years prior, all routed through the same shuttered vendor, all approved under initials that matched Victor Graham, revealing a deliberate, systemic fraud rather than an isolated incident. He called Camille directly, met her in person the next morning with printed evidence, and watched her expression harden as she recognized the initials as her operations director's. She told him to keep working, avoid Victor, and call her directly with anything else. And shortly afterward Nathan received an anonymous threatening text warning him to walk away, which he documented rather than answered. Over the following days Victor left carefully worded voicemails questioning costs. A freelance journalist showed up fishing for quotes about questionable restoration practices, and an unfamiliar car sat parked outside the shop for 2 days straight, all of which Nathan disclosed fully to Ray, who took the news in stride and stayed anyway, joking about turning down his brother-in-law's job offer once again. On day 31, Victor's friendly tone vanished, replaced by a formal legal letter accusing Nathan of inflated costs and mismanagement and demanding he pause work for a third-party review, which Alan identified as a strategic move to build a false paper trail rather than a genuine dispute, advising Nathan to keep working and let him respond through proper channels. Victor called repeatedly afterward, and when he finally got through, Nathan flatly restated every documented defect as verified fact, not opinion, and ended the call. The remaining repairs, alignment, brake bleeding, a final pressure test, revealed one last flaw: a faulty fitting in an original brake line section that would have failed gradually under hard braking, which Nathan corrected and logged. On day 42, Camille visited again, visibly more strained, and standing beside the nearly finished Ferrari admitted her father used to drive it on weekend mornings and always came home happier, adding that she suspected now it was less about the drive and more about arriving home without incident. She confirmed Victor had been spreading claims that Nathan fabricated problems, and admitted she intended to act on what she now knew, though not yet. After finishing brake bleeding and a full load simulation with no faults found, Nathan and Ray gave the car a final walkthrough, both agreeing it was finally correct, and the next morning Nathan completed a meticulous 2-hour formal inspection before signing the certification, an act that felt weightier than any he'd signed before. That afternoon, Camille arrived with Daniel Ruiz, the company's head of internal audit, who revealed his team had already found the same fraudulent pattern across at least 11 other vehicles in the collection, all tied to the same vendor and same approval signature, and confirmed that an internal recall had quietly grounded all affected cars 3 days earlier, before Nathan had even finished. Camille authorized full payment on the spot and asked to be present for the signing, telling Nathan afterward that she'd watched him work for 6 weeks and no longer had any doubt about who was telling the truth. When Victor arrived shortly after, unaware of what had unfolded, his composure cracked briefly before he excused himself, and Daniel warned Camille that Victor would likely try to disrupt things, to which she calmly replied they were already ahead of him. That evening, once the payment cleared, Nathan called Paul at the bank to settle his loan balance for good, quietly relieved. And days later Ray heard through a cousin in legal circles that Victor had hired criminal defense counsel, information confirmed soon after when Camille visited again, this time bringing a box of her father's private papers, revealing that Weston Ashford had sensed something wrong with the car's braking years before his death, had noted his suspicions by hand, and had simply stopped driving it rather than risk it, once even mentioning in a recorded note a mechanic he trusted named Nathan Ford, from a GTO repair over a decade earlier. Moved by this, Nathan admitted he barely remembered the encounter, but Camille explained her father had written down his name specifically, believing that if he ever trusted the Ferrari to anyone, it would be him. The following week, Daniel's completed audit revealed 14 vehicles total affected by the fraud, worth roughly $2 million in falsified charges and far more in required repairs, all traced to invoices signed by Victor, along with recovered emails detailing the scheme and even contact with the same journalist who'd approached Nathan, revealing Victor had been quietly preparing a counternarrative in case the fraud surfaced. Victor was suspended immediately, and Camille asked Nathan's permission before issuing a public statement crediting his role in exposing the fraud, which he agreed to only if kept simple and unembellished. The statement went out days before the auction, prompting a wave of media attention, new client interest, and calls from Walter and Tony offering support, all of which Nathan handled carefully, routing press inquiries to Alan and raising Ray's pay significantly. Long overdue, Nathan personally delivered the Ferrari to the auction venue, where Camille told him she planned to drive it once around the courtyard before the sale, and admitted her father would have wanted to see it running true again. The car ultimately sold for several $1 million to a Swiss collector known for meticulous care, and afterward Camille called Nathan to describe the drive, echoing her father's old belief that a well-built car will always tell you the truth if you know how to listen. In the months that followed, Camille brought Nathan on as a paid consultant to help redesign the company's vehicle service protocols, insisting oversight and approval be separated and independent inspection required for major work, a role Nathan approached the same way he approached machines, understanding not just what failed, but why the system allowed it. That winter, Victor Graham was formally charged and later pleaded guilty to fraud and conspiracy, receiving a multi-year sentence and lasting restitution obligations, information Nathan absorbed without any real sense of triumph, since his focus had never been Victor himself but the people who might have been hurt. By the following year, Nathan had hired a third mechanic, Nina Ortiz, expanding the shop without compromising its standards, and when Camille visited Ashport again with no particular agenda, the two talked easily about work, family, and the ordinary rhythm of their lives, an unlikely friendship built entirely on honesty and shared insistence on doing things right. That evening, watching Ellie read quietly at the kitchen table after another ordinary day, Nathan reflected that the real value had never been in recognition or reward, but in the discipline of the work itself, the refusal to certify what hadn't earned it, the willingness to say something wasn't finished when everyone wanted to hear otherwise, because that was the only way to look at what he'd built without needing to look away from any part of it. And with that quiet certainty, he added the salt to the pasta water, got the amount right this time, and called his daughter to dinner.